Have you ever noticed how many superheroes have parents or loved ones who die tragically? It's a weird way to start a message, I know, but bear with me. Over the past, decade or so, it's been a really popular movie genre to do a hero's origin story, to do the story of their history, their background, and if you've ever seen any of these movies, you know that a loved one tends to die. I mean, start thinking about it, like Batman. Batman loses both of his parents and then like all of his girlfriends. All right, Spider-Man. Spider-Man loses his parents and then his uncle and then again like all of his girlfriends. Superman. Superman loses his entire species, which includes his parents. Then he gets to Earth where he's adopted by another family and then he loses his adopted father. Captain America. Captain America loses his best friend, boo. Then his girlfriend, boo. But then his best friend turns out to be alive, yay! Except he's a brainwashed Nazi assassin, double boo, right? You're catching on. How about space? Virtually everyone from space, every Guardian of the Galaxy, Thor, Loki, Luke Skywalker, Rey, Han Solo, the Mandalorian, and Baby Yoda, all orphans, all right? Now, you get it like I get it when it comes to these stories. Their struggles, their pain, when we see those things, we understand that they help us look at the stories of these characters and go, man, by understanding their pain, by understanding their struggle, they become more complex, they become more interesting, they become more compelling. And so we watch them go through their pain, we watch them go through their struggles, and we know this is just going to be a part of their history. This is going to be a part of their origin story. These are the things that are going to make these heroes who they are. We see how their pain and their struggles set them up for their future. It's easy to see for a superhero, but what about us? What about our pain? What about our struggles? See, for us, it's almost impossible to see how our pain in the moment sets us up for any kind of future. Now, we've been in a series, and in this series, we've been talking about the fact how all of us, we've got hopes and dreams and plans, and that life tends to come along and break them. You break them into little pieces. And we've talked about that when that happens, and it's a when, not an if, when this kind of thing happens, the result is that when we're standing amongst the pieces, we often don't know what to do next. And so the point of this series is to help us know what to do when we don't know what to do. And over the course of this series, as we've been talking about broken dreams and broken hopes and things like that, we've been talking about painful things. We've been talking about challenges and difficulties. And today is not going to be any different from that. But today we're going to focus on something. We're going to focus on why our pain and our challenges, they can also be so frustrating. Now, the real stuff that we're talking about are going to be things like what it's like to go to school every single day and get made fun of every single day. What it feels like to get dumped. What it feels like to have your learning challenges, your learning disabilities affect everything, make everything harder. We're going to talk about what it looks like when your parent loses a job, or what it looks like when your self-harm habit gets out of control. See, these are the real things, the painful things that you experience, things like that. And when we're in the middle of those kinds of things, it's very natural to ask, why? Why am I going through this? Why is this happening to me? And the reason that we always ask those kinds of questions is because our struggles are often, they feel random and pointless and unnecessary. That's what makes our pain so frustrating. See, we have things in our lives that we do that aren't fun. It could be going to work. It could be studying. It could be exercising or dieting. None of those things tend to be much fun, but we can get through them because we understand the why. We understand why we're doing it and what it's supposed to lead to. But when we're in the middle of pain and struggles and they also feel pointless, we don't understand the why of what we're going through, well, that's like the worst. It's like we're taking our misery and we're adding confusion. It makes all the pain feel even worse. And when we're in the middle of stuff like that, it's not like in the movies where you look at a superhero and you feel like you can tie a pretty little bow on the things that they're going through. You can look at the things they're going through and say, I see how that sets them up for the future. But when it's our pain and it's our struggles, when it's our problems, they only get worse by not knowing what the purpose of the pain, of that struggle, of what it could be. So what do you do when you find yourself in that situation? What do you do when you find yourself in the situation of going through pain and not knowing why? Well, one of the things you can do is you can look at the life of someone who has gone through a similar situation, and that takes us back to the life of Joseph. Let me give you a quick review of who Joseph is. Joseph is a figure that we find the recording, the telling of his story in the Old Testament, which basically means that Joseph lived long before Jesus was born on this earth. And we've gone through a lot of the craziness of Joseph's story already. It began with the fact that Joseph was sold into slavery. By his own family, by the way, which is a terrible thing that actually happens more often in this world than we like to think about. But after he was sold into slavery, he then got taken to a foreign country, Egypt to be specific. So he's not even near his home. He's taken far away, and there he is bought by a slave owner who also happened to be a high-ranking official, a military official in Egypt. Now there, in that household, that is where Joseph also was accused of doing something that he did not do. That's what we talked about last week. And in the midst of that, he actually gets thrown into prison for something he didn't do. So in rapid summary, what we've got is we've got a man who went from being a free man to being a slave to then being put in prison for something he did not do. If anyone had the right to say, why is this happening? Why am I going through this? If anyone would look at something and say, I don't see a purpose to my pain, it would be Joseph. And that's where we're going to pick up his story. He's now in jail for something he did not do. And from there, we pick up his story in Genesis chapter 40, verse 1. It says this, it says, sometime later, Pharaoh's chief cupbearer and chief baker offended their royal master. Pharaoh became angry with these two officials and he put them in prison where Joseph was in the palace of the captain of the guard. Now, Pharaoh is not a name, Pharaoh is a title. It's a title for the person who ruled Egypt. And apparently, the Pharaoh, the ruler of Egypt, if you ticked him off, he'd just throw you in jail. He just wouldn't even put up with you anymore. He'd throw you in prison, and not for like 24 hours, but actually it goes on and says this cupbearer and this baker, they remained in prison for quite some time. And the captain of the guard assigned them to Joseph, who looked after them. And while they were in prison, Pharaoh's cupbearer and baker each had a dream one night, and each dream had its own meaning. When Joseph saw them the next morning, he noticed that they both looked upset. Why do you look so worried today? He asked them. And they replied, we both had dreams last night, but no one can tell us what they mean. Well, interpreting dreams is God's business, Joseph replied. Go ahead and tell me your dreams. Now, please notice something here. The first thing to notice is Joseph is in jail. He's in jail after he got sold into slavery. And he's in jail for something he didn't actually do, all right? Joseph's life is rough. It's real bad. And yet here we see him showing compassion to two guys. And we see him giving credit and glory to God in the middle of it, saying that it's God's business to do miracles, God's business to give answers. how in the world is Joseph doing this? Guys, if you're anything like me, if something like fails to load fast enough on your phone, it can ruin your day, okay? But Joseph has been sold into slavery and put in jail for something he did not do, and he's still showing compassion. He's still glorifying God. Like, how is that possible? Well, I want to remind you of what we talked about last week. Last week, we said, look, when you don't know what to do, ask yourself who you want to be. Joseph had made a decision about who he wanted to be, and that guided his actions even in difficult circumstances. But now we need to look at what Joseph did when it came to his frustration about not knowing the purpose for his pain. Well, these guys, after Joseph asks them, hey, just tell me the dreams, and God might give you an answer. Well, they tell him the dream, and God did tell Joseph what they meant. And what Joseph tells these guys is going to happen actually happens. The cupbearer ends up walking free, and the baker doesn't. But before the cupbearer walks out of jail, he gives Joseph a promise. He thanks Joseph for what he did, and he says, don't worry, Joseph. When I get back to Pharaoh, I'm going to tell him about you. I'm going to talk to Pharaoh about you, and I'm going to help you get out of jail, get out of this unjust situation. And then the cupbearer walks out of prison, and nothing that he promised happened. In fact, we're told that Joseph is just forgotten in prison. The cupbearer doesn't keep his promise. The cupbearer just walks away and goes on with his life. For years. Not a couple of weeks, not even a couple of months, for years. For 2 years. Joseph has this glimmer of hope, and he's forgotten. Can we sit with 2 years for just a second? Guys, 2 years. COVID has been 6 months. Hasn't it felt like eternity? Now imagine being in jail in a foreign country as a slave for something you didn't even do. For 2 years. That's tough. But at the end of those 2 years, Pharaoh has a dream. He actually has a couple of them. And those dreams disturb Pharaoh. He's freaking out. And all of a sudden, just out of the blue, the cupbearer's like, whoa, I know somebody. He suddenly remembers Joseph, and he tells Pharaoh about Joseph. And so Pharaoh calls Joseph in. And Joseph tells Pharaoh, look, God can interpret your dreams. And so Pharaoh tells Joseph the dreams, and through Joseph, God gives Pharaoh a message. And the message is, disaster is coming. And Pharaoh hears this, and he's so overwhelmed. He's so impressed with the fact that Joseph can interpret the dream that he also is so convinced that God is with Joseph that Pharaoh puts Joseph essentially in charge of all of Egypt. Joseph gets put second in charge. And because Joseph is put in charge, Egypt not only survives a famine, but they thrive in the middle of a famine. And under Joseph's leadership, because of Joseph, hundreds of thousands of people are spared from a slow and painful death through starvation. Joseph is able to save lives, hundreds of thousands of people, because he was put in charge of Egypt, because Pharaoh had a dream. And Pharaoh learned about Joseph because a cupbearer who ultimately he had forgotten Joseph in prison, but he had gotten an interpretation from Joseph, and Joseph was in that prison because he was falsely accused. He was falsely accused because he was in the house of a military official. He was in that house because he had been taken to Egypt, and he was taken to Egypt because he was sold into slavery. And when you look at this overall story of Joseph's life, it's easy to see how all of his pains and all of his problems and all of his struggles put him in the position to do great things. And if you find yourself in pain and struggles and not knowing the purpose of it, if you're in the middle of your broken dreams and plans and wondering what should you do, well, one of the things that you should do is remember that your problems can position you for a purpose. Your problems can position you for a purpose. Now, I'm not saying, and I don't want to be accused of telling you that like if you're poor now, one day God's going to make you rich. And I'm not saying that if you're bullied now, one day you're going to be famous. Like that's not what this means. What I am telling you is that our good God does not waste our pain. He does not waste it. When our dreams and our hopes and our plans end up in pieces, He does not waste this. He does not waste our pain. In fact, when you're in the situation where you don't know what to do, you should remember first that God is with you. Second, you should ask yourself who you want to be. And third, you should trust that God will keep this promise. Romans 8:28 says, we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love Him. Now, what that means is this. What that means is that God doesn't always break your plans, but He does redeem them. Now, I'm going to start walking through some of this, and I just want you to lock in because this is really important. God doesn't always break your plans, but sometimes He does. And that can always feel shocking and incredible because, yes, sometimes, like Joseph, he's just the victim of other people's sin, other people's evil. God did not sell Joseph into slavery. God did not falsely accuse Joseph. No, but God used all of those things for Joseph's good and the good of others. But sometimes God does break our plans. And this is just what you need to know. That if you knew what God knew, you'd want your plans broken. If you knew what your plans, which you think are so shiny and good, if you knew what God knew before He broke your plans, you'd want Him to. But this is what I can tell you and promise you that comes from Romans 8:28, and it comes from the story of Joseph. What He does do is He redeems our hopes and our plans and our dreams. And what that means is that if you recognize in the middle of your pain, in the middle of your struggle, in the middle of the pieces, if you recognize that God is still good and you give Him the pieces, He will exchange your pieces for something better. He will take the broken pieces and He will give you something better, something stronger, something more beautiful. And what this looks like can be different. I mean, imagine where Joseph started. Joseph had hopes and he had dreams and he had plans, and they basically included living with his family and having some kind of influence, even power with his family. What God gave him instead was far more influence and far more power than he ever could have imagined, yet at the same time, he was alone in a foreign land. At the same time, he hadn't seen his parents or his brothers in years. At the same time, he had suffered through injustice for years upon years upon years. But what God gave him was ultimately good, but it looked nothing like what Joseph started with. And you'll notice that the cracks, the breaks, that God doesn't like just erase them. It's not like He just wipes them clean as if nothing had ever happened. No. When our plans break and our dreams break, sometimes we maintain the cracks, but we are no longer broken. The cracks become sources of beauty. They become sources of wisdom. They become sources of strength. When we submit our broken plans to God and trust Him, He works good in those and He gives us back something beautiful. And it might not look like what it started out. But when God redeems our plans, what He gives us back is always better than what we started with. And what that means is that the hardest and the worst things that you experience, they are not the end of your story. They may be a part of something far better. Now, here's the deal. Man, like this kind of stuff, this idea of God redeeming our hopes and our plans and our dreams, like we started off with, it's so hard to hold on to that, to remember that in the midst of our struggles and our pain. And even the story of Joseph, while true, while an actual thing that happened to an actual man, he can sometimes feel like a superhero because his experiences were so long ago and so different from our own. And so when I think of how to set you up well in this, I have one idea. You need to find a follower of Jesus, someone that you respect, someone that's just further down the road than you are, and ask them how they gave their broken pieces to God and what he gave them back. Ask them, how did God work in a situation that felt like pure pain in the moment for your good? Ask them how their problems positioned them for a purpose. And I'm willing to bet that the person that you ask, whether it's one of your leaders or one of your pastors or an older brother or sister or an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent or your parents, if you ask them this question, I'm willing to bet they'll have a story, because every follower of Jesus that has followed him long enough has a story of their plans ending up in pieces and yet seeing how God used it for the good. That when they're amongst the pieces, they struggled to see what purpose was in their pain, and yet over time they saw God redeem those things and bring about something beautiful. Practically, the way for you to end up finding hope in the midst of the pieces is to talk to someone who's been through it themselves and see that this is not something reserved for superheroes. This is something that can be your truth and your story. This is something that God can use to set you up for your future. You just have to submit your pieces to him and let him redeem it. I'm going to pray and ask that God would help you do that, and then I'll kind of repeat this simple challenge, and then it'll be up to you to pursue it. Father, I ask in the name of Jesus that you would smooth the path between the students that hear my voice right now and them receiving a story that gives them hope, that gives them strength, that gives them the ability to see how their problems might position them for a purpose. I, like so many followers of Jesus, I have experienced you taking the broken pieces of my hopes and my dreams and giving me back something far better. And there are so many followers of Jesus who have experienced that. And what I'm asking, God, is that you would connect these students that hear me right now, that you would connect them to a follower of Jesus like that who'd be willing to share their story, be willing to show them that path. Not that it'll be the student's path, but that it can help the student walk their path when they find themselves amongst the pieces. See how their pain can position them for a better future. God, I just ask that you would give them the wisdom to identify someone like that and the courage to go have a conversation with them, whether it's right now in their own homes, whether it's right now at this student gathering where they're around leaders and other students and pastors, or whether they're watching this alone and they just have to think of someone to call them or set up a time to talk to them. Just help them identify that person, have the courage to pursue them. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So the challenge is simple, but it's not easy. The simple challenge is this: ask a follower of Jesus how God took a painful thing in their life and used it for good. Man, think of someone that's just further down the road than you. And if you're having trouble explaining to them what you even mean in this question, tell them about Romans 8:28 or show them this video. And then have a conversation and let what God has done for them give you hope. Let their story glorify God and be to your benefit. Honestly, you think this might be strange, but for the person that you ask, this is a gift. To have an opportunity to talk about how good God has been in their life. It might not be easy to show the cracks, to remember these things, but ultimately it's beautiful, and they will thank you for giving them an opportunity to tell that story. I know I would. I hope God blesses this journey for you, and I hope that you learn something and are encouraged by it until we see each other next week for the conclusion of our series and how the life of Joseph ends, as it's telling in the Bible. I'm looking forward to seeing you then. Take care, guys. I'll see y'all next week.